The airport was already humming. Denver's morning light streamed through high-arched glass, falling like a spotlight over the slow-moving bodies of travelers. Luggage wheels whispered across the tiles. Boarding calls echoed from hidden speakers. And somewhere near Gate C-19, a toddler's laughter rose before vanishing into the air like steam. Hal Briggs didn't notice the laughter. He didn't hear the boarding calls. His steps were deliberate. Not slow from indecision, but from age. 90 years had folded into his knees and hips, not all kindly, but he stood straight. Every button on his windbreaker aligned. His navy cap was brushed, the fabric faded just enough to speak without words. In his left hand, a small carry-on. Inside, socks, a pocket Bible, 2 sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and a velvet-lined box carrying medals older than most people in this terminal. He stopped at the checkpoint rope, waiting quietly. No rush, no phone in hand. Just his presence, like a lone sentinel among passing caravans. "Next!" called a voice ahead. Hal moved forward. The tray was plastic, gray, the kind that never remembers who touched it last. He set his shoes in first, then his belt, then the box, carefully, with both hands, onto the tray. The lid slipped open just slightly, revealing the shimmer of service ribbons, the edge of a tarnished silver star. The TSA agent barely glanced up. "Sir, I need you to open that." Hal lifted the lid. The agent's brows lifted. "What are these?" "Medals," Hal said softly. "For a war." The agent turned the box sideways. One of the pins slipped loose and clinked against the tray. A second agent, leaner, younger, with narrow eyes and the kind of jaw that rarely moved unless chewing gum or chewing someone out, stepped closer. Paul Heisenberg, a name printed on a badge too clean to belong to someone kind. He picked up the silver star with 2 fingers, turning it under the fluorescence like it might be counterfeit. "This have a sharp edge?" Hal didn't answer right away. He just looked at the man. "Sir," Paul continued, "I'll need you to remove the jacket too, and the brace. We'll inspect everything. It's policy." There was no apology in his voice, no pause for respect, just protocol with a smirk. Hal began to unbutton his jacket. His fingers moved slower now, stiff with arthritis. Underneath, sewn into the inside lining, was a patch, hand-stitched, faded gold on navy blue, Recon Signal, 1953, Hallis Ridge. Paul didn't notice the patch. He was too focused on the small Marine-issue penknife that had been in the side pocket. He plucked it out with exaggerated caution, holding it aloft. "Sir, this is not permitted." Hal looked up. "That knife," he said, "was given to me by a man who never made it out of Korea." Paul examined it. "Still has a blade. Could be a weapon." "It's been folded since 1953, Hal replied. "That blade's not for cutting. It's for remembering." But Paul wasn't listening. He dropped the knife into a clear bag and zipped it. "I'm flagging this. You'll need to come with me." A pause. A breath caught somewhere in the back of Hal's throat. He reached gently toward the metal box. The lid was now fully open. The silver star lay askew, ribbon twisted, dull under the airport lights. He straightened it with 2 fingers, then looked up again. Around him a few heads turned. A mother tugged her child forward. A young man in uniform, maybe Air Force, watched from the side, eyes narrowing slightly. But no one spoke. Paul motioned again. "Now, sir." Hal followed, silently, stiffly. Behind him the tray sat abandoned, metals cold against plastic, a memory misplaced in the machinery of modern movement. And the question hung in the air, unanswered. What kind of country forgets the weight behind a ribbon? Hal sat in the small, sterile room just beyond the checkpoint, what they called secondary screening. But to him, it felt more like exile, a place where people were sorted by suspicion, not story. Fluorescent lights buzzed above like a distant swarm. The walls were white but yellowing in the corners. A laminated sign read, "Thank you for your patience," as though patience was something you could request after taking a man's dignity. He adjusted in the plastic chair. His back didn't like sitting long anymore. Neither did his knees. But he didn't complain. Not out loud. That was one lesson Margaret had taught him well. How to carry discomfort like a folded coat, silent and neat. He thought of her now. Not in the abstract, but vividly. As if she might walk into the room at any moment, her hair still tied back with that sky-blue ribbon, the one she wore the first day they met. He saw her hands, small, capable, always busy, packing sandwiches, tucking socks into suitcases, folding little notes into his uniform pocket before deployments. "You've already walked through worse," her memory whispered. "Just make it through this." She'd been gone 2 years this spring. Cancer, swift and unkind. He still hadn't moved her books from the side table, still brewed her brand of coffee out of habit, still found her voice hiding in the quietest corners of the day. It was her voice that pushed him onto this trip in the first place. His granddaughter, Emma, was graduating in San Diego, first in the family to finish college. Margaret had always said she saw the same fire in Emma's eyes that once lit Hal's own. That mix of stubbornness and kindness you couldn't teach, only inherit. "Go," Margaret had urged in one of their last conversations. "Go see her walk that stage. Take your medals. Let her see who you are." And so he had. He'd packed his own bag, booked his flight with the help of a neighbor, polished his shoes. He even trimmed the edges of the photo he kept in his wallet, the one of Margaret in her garden, smiling at the camera with dirt on her cheeks. He'd wanted Emma to see that too, see the roots she came from. Now, that same wallet sat on the desk before him, open, exposed, his ID beside it, face up, as if to prove that he still existed. A different agent, not Paul, had entered the room a moment ago to ask questions. Polite, robotic ones. "Where are you traveling? How long will you be gone? Are you carrying any items given by someone else?" Hal answered with calm, practiced words. But inside, something was shifting. Not anger, not yet. Just a quiet ache. The kind that builds not from one wound, but from 100 small cuts. Across from him, the metal case rested on the desk, open. The silver star sat slightly crooked, its ribbon still creased from the handling. It hadn't been touched in years. He never brought it out, not even on Veterans Day. But today had felt important, because that medal didn't belong to just him. It belonged to a February morning in 1953, to a radio that shouldn't have worked, to a signal that saved hundreds, and to a man named Jake Rogers, who didn't come back from that snow-covered ridge. Hal swallowed. The penknife, Jake's, was gone now. Confiscated, bagged and tagged like a threat. The absurdity of it clung to the back of Hal's throat like smoke. That knife had once cut wire in the dead of night, freeing Hal's foot from a trap line. Its edge had dulled over decades of harmless presence in a drawer. It had never been a weapon. Until now. He pressed his hands together, fingers shaking slightly. Not from rage, but from weight. The weight of memory, of years, of loss. From the corner of his eye, he noticed a reflection in the plexiglass window. His own face drawn and tired. But beneath it, layered like an old film reel, he saw another version of himself. Younger, in uniform, covered in sweat and dirt, standing beside a signal mast that barely held, shouting coordinates into the receiver while shells cracked the ice around him. That boy didn't know he'd live this long. Didn't expect to be the last one left. He'd carried Jake out that night, dragged him through 2 miles of snow, only to realize, somewhere near the riverbank, that Jake's breathing had stopped. That's when Hal stopped being young. The door clicked. He turned. Paul Heisenberg stepped in again, clipboard in hand. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a flat expression Hal couldn't quite read. "We're processing a temporary restriction," Paul said, voice clipped. "Pending further review, you won't be flying today." Hal blinked once. Just once. "For carrying medals?" he asked. Paul didn't answer. "And for keeping a memory in my pocket." Still silence. Hal stood slowly. He didn't rise in protest. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood like a man used to holding his own pain, not displaying it. Then he said something almost too soft to hear. "My granddaughter graduates today." Paul turned away. Hal gathered his box, closed the lid gently, and tucked it under his arm. He didn't ask for help, didn't demand justice. He simply walked out of the room, a little slower now, a little more bent, but not broken. Outside the security door, the air was cooler, sharper. A few travelers glanced up as he passed, but none stopped. And yet, somewhere behind a column, quiet, watching, a man in an Air Force polo had just hit record on his phone. His name was Tommy Foster, and his eyes were already narrowing with recognition. It should have been nothing. A simple screening, a forgettable moment in a long day. But power, even in small hands, can bend quiet minutes into sharp edges. Paul Heisenberg adjusted the cuff of his uniform shirt as he stepped back out to the screening area. He didn't like mornings, not for their pace, but because they were filled with too many witnesses. He preferred mid-afternoons, when most people were tired, less likely to protest. Easier to enforce protocol without friction. But today was different. Today, Hannah Carter was observing, the new departmental supervisor. She was somewhere in the terminal, clipboard in hand, evaluating team efficiency, professionalism, record accuracy. Paul had seen her twice already, once near the break room, once talking with the checkpoint manager. She moved like someone used to formation drills, poised, watchful. Her military record was known to everyone in the department, whispered through coffee-fueled briefings like sacred scripture. And Paul wanted her to notice him, not just as another cog, but as the man who knew the rules better than anyone, who enforced them, who served order. He'd never been a top student, never the favorite son. His father, a retired Marine, had once called him a paperweight, always around, never moving anything forward. His younger brother became a mechanical engineer. His sister, a trauma nurse. Paul? He floated from job to job, shipping dock, security guard, warehouse checker, until TSA offered him a position, not because he tested well, but because his uncle worked in HR. It was the first badge he'd ever worn, and Paul wore it like a shield. When Hal Briggs returned to collect his things after the holding room, Paul was waiting, clipboard back in hand, face neutral. "I need you to sign this acknowledgement," he said, holding the page out. "You've been placed on temporary flight restriction pending review. You can appeal it through proper channels." Hal didn't reach for the paper. Instead, he looked down at the metal box in his hand. The silver star rested inside, now pinned securely, but somehow smaller under the weight of the morning. "I've flown this country's skies for 6 decades, Hal said, voice calm. "No one's ever called me a threat." Paul didn't flinch. "Policy changes. Does character?" Hal asked. That gave Paul pause. Just for a second. But pride filled the space before doubt could enter. "I'm following procedure, sir. You're hiding behind it." The words weren't sharp. They were quiet, the kind that find marrow instead of skin. Paul looked away. A few passengers were watching now. A family near the end of the queue, an elderly woman adjusting her scarf, the Air Force man still standing at a distance, phone at his side, but camera still rolling. "Let's keep this moving," Paul muttered. Hal didn't move. "I want the knife back," he said. "It's a prohibited item," Paul snapped. "Weapons of any kind." "That's not a weapon," Hal interrupted. "It's a memory." His voice cracked on the last syllable. Paul turned slightly, saw the others watching, and lowered his tone. "Sir, you're holding up the line." Behind him, someone muttered, "Let the old guy through." But Paul didn't budge, and neither did Hal. Then, the moment cracked. A sudden clink. The metal box, now slipping from Hal's grip, hit the floor. Metals scattered like stones across tile. The silver star spun for a beat before coming to rest near Paul's shoe. No one moved, not right away. Paul looked down, then back up at Hal. Hal knelt, slowly, painfully. One knee touched ground with a wince he refused to voice. He reached for the silver star with fingers that had once stitched wounds, once gripped a frozen radio receiver, while shrapnel lit the sky. Paul didn't help. Instead, he turned and walked back behind the line. It wasn't his job to help pick up pieces. Hal gathered the metals one by one. The floor was cold, hard, but he didn't curse it. He'd been on harder ground in colder places, in bloodier ones. Still, as he rose, hand closing the box, something inside him shifted. Not broken. Not yet. But close. The glass doors hissed open as Hal stepped outside the terminal, pushed gently by the weight of a moment that hadn't yet finished falling. He found a quiet bench beneath an iron overhang, shaded from the creeping morning sun. His fingers lingered on the metal case resting in his lap, the box no longer pristine, edges dented from the fall, the velvet inside catching threads like memory catches breath. He didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, he leaned back slowly, spine easing into the metal slats of the bench, and let his eyes close. Behind his eyelids, Denver disappeared. So did the buzz of traffic, the polite airport announcements, the echo of polished shoes on linoleum. All of it gave way to a different sound, a sound he hadn't heard in decades, but one he would never forget. Wind. Cold, screaming wind. February 1953. The mountains near Huangji Valley didn't care for men. They swallowed voices, froze lungs, erased bodies like they'd never been. The snow was not soft. It was jagged, dry, bitter. Each gust bit deeper than the last, stripping warmth with the patience of a predator. Hal had been 20 years old, a Navy radio man assigned to a temporary ground team, Recon Signal Bravo. They'd been sent to re-establish communications with a forward post that had gone dark 2 days prior. 3 men went in. Only 1 came out. Hal could still feel the radio pack biting into his shoulders, ice crusting at the edge of his goggles, the staccato of enemy fire crackling in the distance. They had found the post, or what was left of it, burned out. Frozen bodies half buried beneath collapsed tin roofing. The antenna shattered. That's when Jake Rogers made the call. "We can still bounce signal if we hit that ridge," Jake had said, pointing through a patch of forest. 15 minutes. Maybe less. Victor Hale had just shaken his head. 15 minutes in a sniper lane, Jake. You planning to pray your way through? Hal didn't answer. He had already started walking. The ridge was exposed. Dangerous. But the high-frequency receiver in Hal's pack could reach the carrier fleet if it was placed just right. They'd been waiting for coordinates. Without them, the entire battalion was blind, and a carrier group was sailing straight into an ambush. Time didn't stretch in those moments. It compressed, became sharp. Hal remembered laying prone atop that ridge, knees buried in snow, while Jake and Victor ran interference. Jake had dragged a broken barrel into view, firing wildly to draw attention. Victor had circled left, trying to locate the sniper nests. Hal had found the signal point, reattached a split cable with numb fingers, and keyed in the transmission. He had to repeat it 3 times. Under fire. One last message needed to get through. A carrier group was steaming toward enemy range, blind, unprepared. Without Hal's signal, they'd be walking into fire. Victor Hale had gone radio silent 20 minutes ago, crawling down the south edge after being hit in the shoulder. Hal didn't know how bad. But Jake Rogers had stayed visible. On purpose. Running diversion. Firing from behind a shattered crate, daring the enemy to aim his way. Daring death to look him in the eyes. Hal keyed in the coordinates. The signal transmitted. Once. Twice. A 3rd time, for good measure. No response. Just the sudden silence that often came after a successful send. He packed the gear. Looked for Jake. And there. A dark form collapsed in the snow, just beyond the ridge lip. Hal slid down the incline like a man possessed. Each step bit into his knees, ice slicing at his fingers. Jake was on his side, bleeding badly from a shot just under the ribs. "Stay with me," Hal muttered. Jake didn't speak. Hal slung the radio across his back, slid his arms under Jake's shoulders, pulled. The journey to the rendezvous point was miles. Miles through brush, shallow stream beds, broken ice. Hal's lungs screamed, his legs buckled, his back tore with every drag. But he didn't stop. Couldn't. The man he carried had saved the mission, had drawn the bullets, had given Hal the chance to do what was needed. And halfway through the snowfield, when they were alone in a clearing so silent it swallowed breath, Jake stirred. "Briggs!" Hal stopped, dropped to his knees beside him. Jake's eyes barely opened, but his hand moved. Pulled something from his inner vest pocket. The penknife. It was small, unimpressive, but worn. Loved. The blade etched with initials. The kind of thing a man keeps, not for war, but for memory. Jake pressed it into Hal's palm. "You make it count," he whispered. Then he went still. Hal didn't know, not then. He kept dragging him, kept muttering promises, kept praying, until a wire snapped beneath his boot and the trap teeth sprang up from under snow. Steel, brutal. Instinct moved faster than thought. He used the knife, cut through the coil, freed himself. He made it to the rendezvous point just before dawn, but Jake never breathed again. And Victor never arrived. Weeks later, the Red Cross would report Victor's name among the missing, presumed captured, likely succumbed to injuries, alone in the trees. Hal carried the penknife back home, cleaned the blood, not the handle, kept the dirt under the hinge. They mailed him a medal in a box, but nothing came for Jake, or Victor. Now, 70 years later, Hal sat in Denver with that same medal resting in his lap, and that knife, confiscated by a man too blind to see its history, sitting in a clear plastic bag, labeled as contraband. The world moved fast, but memory moved deeper. From across the way, Tommy Foster lowered his phone for a moment, studying the man on the bench. There was something in Hal's stillness that felt louder than noise, something worth standing up for. The tension in the terminal was thick now, not from volume, but from silence. The kind of silence that lingers when something is off, but no one quite knows what to do about it. Paul Heisenberg stood behind the screening station, arms folded, jaw tight, eyes scanning the crowd without seeing it. His heart beat harder than he expected, not from nerves, he told himself, but from conviction, from resolve. He had followed every rule. He had enforced them precisely. That's what Hannah Carter would want, wouldn't she? Discipline. No exceptions. No grey areas. If she was anything like the profiles suggested, decorated, sharp, loyal to structure, then he had just delivered a masterclass in authority. So why did he feel like the floor might be shifting beneath him? From where he stood, he could still see Hal Briggs sitting quietly near the terminal's entrance, the box of medals now closed, resting on his lap like a folded flag. The man hadn't raised his voice, hadn't resisted, had simply stood up, been escorted to the holding room, and walked out again with the dignity of a man who had weathered greater storms. Paul hated that, because part of him wanted Hal to have barked back, to make it easy, to give him something to write on the report other than non-compliant tone, and refused to surrender unlisted item. Instead, Paul was left with a trembling old man, a tarnished silver star, and a rising sea of curious onlookers who didn't yet understand what they had just seen, but knew somehow that it didn't feel right. He tapped at his terminal, logging the incident into the system. Possible security risk, retained blade, refused secondary full compliance, flight access revoked pending TSA review. Each box he checked made his pulse quicken. He could feel it, his moment. The one that might reach Hannah's desk. The one that might finally move his name from margin to memory. Behind him, a low voice broke the rhythm. "You flagging him permanently?" Paul turned. It was Lisa, another agent, older, seasoned. She wore her badge like it meant something different. Less shield, more promise. "Temporary," Paul said quickly. "Enough to hold until review." Lisa frowned. "You sure that's the move?" "He had a weapon," Paul replied, voice sharp, and his attitude was calm. Paul didn't answer. Lisa hesitated, then glanced toward Hal. "He's a veteran, Paul. Did you even ask his story?" "We're not paid to ask stories." "No," she said. "We're just living in one." Paul looked away. The discomfort in his chest was unfamiliar. He didn't know how to process doubt. So, he buried it under paperwork. At the same time, Tommy Foster finally stepped forward. He had watched long enough. The confrontation, the silence, the scattered medals on the floor. His phone had captured it all, but that wasn't why he was moving now. Recording was just instinct. Stepping forward, that was choice. He approached Hal with quiet steps. The bench creaked as he knelt beside it. "Sir," he said gently, "I saw what happened." Hal didn't turn. "Not the first time I've been searched." Tommy offered a faint smile. "Maybe, but I don't think they've ever searched you like that." Hal glanced at him. Their eyes met. Something passed between them. Not just age and youth, not just uniform and civilian, but understanding. Tommy extended his hand. "Tommy Foster, Air Force, off duty." Hal shook it. "Hal Briggs." Tommy reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "With your permission, sir, I'd like to send this to someone. Someone who will ask questions." Hal didn't answer at first. He looked down at the box, then toward the terminal beyond, so full of motion and blindness. Then he nodded once. "Do what you think's right." Tommy stood, heart already pounding as he typed the name. General Alan Rowe, a former instructor, now a senior director over airport operations. A man who didn't just nod during seminars. He listened. The kind of man who still saluted the dead, even if they were only names on a slide. As Tommy hit send, a different kind of chain reaction began. And for Paul Heisenberg, the morning had just reached its tipping point. Tommy Foster didn't like confrontation. He wasn't built for drama. Most of his work in the Air Force was logistics, supply runs, personnel movements, quiet coordination that made the flashier operations possible. He was the guy who got things where they needed to go. Steady, invisible. The kind of man who didn't need a salute to know his value. But what he'd just witnessed had cut deeper than discomfort. It wasn't just the way the old man had been treated, it was who he was. The calm in his face, the medals, real ones. The way his hands had trembled, not from anger, but from remembering. That man wasn't just a passenger. He was history, walking softly through a world that no longer remembered how to listen. Tommy's phone buzzed once in his hand. Delivered. The message had gone through. A short video clip. No narration, no dramatic edits. Just raw footage. Hal being escorted. The scattered medals. The knife labeled weapon. The line of passengers watching in silence. And attached to the file was a short message. "Sir, I don't know if this breaks protocol, but if we're still the country we say we are, someone needs to see this." It took less than 2 minutes for General Alan Rowe to respond. "Tell me which terminal." "I'm on it." Tommy exhaled slowly. His heart, which had been thumping with quiet fury, began to calm. He turned back toward Hal, who was now sitting with his arms folded over the metal case. Not sleeping, just still. Tommy walked over again, this time not kneeling. "Sir," he said, "I don't know if anything will come of this, but someone's listening now." Hal looked up. No smile, but something softened behind his eyes. That's all any of us ever wanted. Meanwhile, across the city, the Office of Airport Security had just received a call. Not routed through customer service, not filtered through bureaucracy. A direct line, from General Rowe to Supervisor Hannah Carter's desk. The operator who answered froze when she heard the name. "Hannah's en route to inspection," she stammered. "Can I—" "Interrupt her," Rowe said. "This is no longer inspection. This is national image." And so the call was made. Hannah Carter, already walking through Terminal D with 2 assistants and a clipboard, stopped mid-step. She didn't blink, didn't ask questions. She just turned to her aide. "Who's on Paul Heisenberg's shift today?" The aide hesitated. "He is." "B-line." "Why?" "Prep a vehicle." Then she turned and walked briskly toward the nearest exit, her boots hitting the tile in a rhythm that sounded a lot like justice. Back in Terminal B, Paul was still behind the scanner, jaw set, filing his final report. He hadn't seen the text, didn't know the calls had already been made, thought he'd handled the problem, cleanly, quietly. And in the bench, 20 feet away, Hal Briggs closed his eyes and whispered the name once more. Jake. not as a curse, but as a reminder. Because sometimes, the echo of sacrifice is what calls the right people home. Hannah Carter didn't believe in hesitation. Not in war, and certainly not in leadership. She had learned that in Kandahar, where second-guessing meant someone didn't make it home. Her uniform might be pressed into a blazer now, her ribbons exchanged for an ID badge. But the mission hadn't changed. Protect the people who protect the country, even when the threat wasn't from without, but within. She slid into the back seat of the black government vehicle, her assistant already tapping on a tablet beside her. A screen lit up with the forwarded video clip, grainy, mid-resolution, but crystal clear in what it showed. An elderly man, calm, composed, being stripped of dignity one protocol at a time. Medals handled like clutter, a personal knife confiscated as contraband, a public moment of humiliation, and no one stepped forward. Except one. Hannah's jaw tightened as she replayed the clip. The second time, she noticed the medal, the silver star. Not a decoration given lightly. She'd seen one up close only once, in the hands of a medic who had pulled 4 men from an overturned MRAP in Helmand. She remembered what he said when asked how he did it. You don't think. You just go. That's what makes it count. The words echoed now, clearer than ever. Hannah looked up from the tablet. Tell Heisenberg I want him outside the checkpoint when I arrive, she said to her assistant. Tell him I need a briefing. And the vet? Her eyes narrowed. He doesn't need a briefing, she replied. He's already earned one. The car turned into the service lane near Terminal B. Security waved them through with a glance. Hannah stepped out before the vehicle had fully stopped, her heels hitting the ground with finality. Inside, Paul Heisenberg straightened his collar. He'd gotten the message. Supervisor Carter will meet you at your post. Have incident details ready. No praise, but not a reprimand either. Which in his mind was praise. He rehearsed the facts. Non-compliance, flagged item, temporary restriction, all standard, all defensible. He adjusted his badge just slightly to the left, practiced a calm expression in the glass of the vending machine near the employee gate, then turned as Hannah entered. She moved with command, not force, precision, the way some officers do when they don't need to shout to fill the room. Paul Heisenberg? She asked. Yes, ma'am. She offered no handshake. Walk me through the incident. Paul launched into his summary, step by step, crisp, like a well-rehearsed drill. He used words like non-compliant, unregistered blade, potential threat, and due diligence. He didn't mention that the man was 90, or that the medals were war-earned, or that the knife was older than Paul's career. Hannah didn't interrupt. She just listened. When he finished, she asked one question. Did he threaten anyone? No, ma'am. Did he raise his voice? No, ma'am. Did he show signs of mental instability, erratic movement, aggression? No, ma'am. But he refused. He refused to surrender an item tied to a fallen comrade. She cut in, voice even. And you escalated? Paul's mouth opened slightly. I followed the protocol, ma'am. We're trained to think, Hannah said. To assess context. To recognize history when it's sitting in front of us, decorated and silent. Paul stepped back slightly. With all due respect, That's when Lisa appeared. Quiet. From the edge of the scanning lane. Ma'am? She said gently. Hannah turned. I was here, Lisa said. And I've seen it before. Not just today. Heisenberg's got a pattern. Paul spun. What? She's not the only one, came a voice from the crowd. An older woman, maybe 70, stepped forward from the seated area, pointing her cane at Paul. He once made me remove a medical brace and stand barefoot for 10 minutes while he told a joke to another agent. People were watching now. Phones lifting, heads turning. Tommy Foster stood near Hal, phone still in hand, but not filming now. Because he didn't need to. History was writing itself, and Paul Heisenberg, who had hoped for praise, was about to learn what real consequence looked like. It happened slowly, as all true reckonings do. 1 second, Paul Heisenberg was the center of control, clipboard in hand, badge shining, believing he'd played the system like a violin. The next, his name was echoing off walls not in celebration, but scrutiny. Hannah Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Instead, she stepped forward, eyes locked on Paul, posture squared not in threat, but in sheer command. The crowd had begun to thicken behind her. Passengers curious, staff uncertain. Word was spreading, phones were up. The low murmur of witnesses filled the space with a tension you could feel in your teeth. "You embarrassed the uniform you never wore," Hannah said, loud enough to carry. "By disgracing the man who did." Paul blinked. No, she cut in, firm, direct. "You don't speak now. You listened to no one this morning. Not him, not your colleague, not your conscience. But you will listen now." She turned to the agents behind him. "Escort him out of this terminal, immediately. Badge and ID retained." Gasps. Not from shock, but from relief. Paul paled. "You don't understand," he said weakly. You thought you were serving order," Hannah said. "But order without honor is just control. And that's not what we build airports or nations on." Lisa stepped forward with two others. They flanked Paul gently but firmly, their silence speaking more than words. Paul hesitated, eyes darting for sympathy. He found none. Not in the crowd, not in the passengers, and certainly not in the old man who now rose from his bench, medals in hand, posture straight. Hal Briggs didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood. As Paul was led past, Hal met his eyes, not with hatred, but with something heavier, pity. And in that moment, Paul's smirk cracked, not from humiliation, but from realization. The moment he understood that he hadn't just lost a job, he'd lost the illusion of control he thought made him strong. The crowd parted as he was escorted away. Then, a beat of silence, and Hannah turned toward Hal. He looked smaller now, wrapped in a soft gray coat, medals glinting dully in the terminal light. But when she saluted him, sharp, palm angled just right, it was the world that shifted, not him. He returned the salute, slower, but no less exact. "You stood for us," she said, voice calm, full. "Today, we stand for you." The crowd began to clap, not loud, not forced, just rising like dawn. One by one, travelers stood. A young boy lowered his video game and placed his hand over his heart. A flight attendant wiped tears from her eyes. Lisa nodded quietly. Tommy stepped forward and stood beside Hal. And still, Hal didn't cry, because this wasn't sadness. This was remembrance. This was what it looked like when a man didn't need to tell his story, because the world had finally started listening. They gave him the ticket in silence, not at a counter, not in a line, but in a private lounge tucked just beyond the terminal's heartbeat. The woman who handed it to him wore navy slacks and a blazer stitched with silver wings. Her voice was gentle, reverent. "First class, San Diego, gate A7. The seat's yours for as long as you want it, Mr. Briggs." Hal took the envelope with both hands, not because he needed to, but because that's how you receive something given, not handed. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, then hesitated. "My grandfather was in the Navy. He always said the quiet ones were the bravest." Hal smiled faintly. We didn't have time to be loud. Outside the lounge, Tommy waited. He didn't hover, just stood at a respectful distance, hands in his jacket pockets. When Hal emerged, Tommy straightened instinctively. "They're boarding in 20, he said. "I'll walk you there." Hal chuckled softly. "Don't you have a flight?" "Missed it," Tommy replied. "Not sorry." As they walked through the corridor, something strange happened. People moved aside, not like they would for a celebrity, more like a procession, quiet, instinctual, solemn. Some placed hands over hearts. A few gave nods, short and firm, no words, just presence. They reached the gate. A steward opened the boarding door without asking for a ticket. As Hal stepped forward, he paused and turned to Tommy. "You did something today." Tommy shook his head. "You did something. I just saw it." Hal looked at the younger man, not searching but seeing. and for a flicker, it was like looking into a mirror that stretched across generations. "Jake would have liked you," he said. Then, without waiting for a reply, he boarded. Inside, the plane was quiet, soft lighting, wide seats. A flight attendant greeted him like one would a priest, or maybe a grandfather whose stories built nations. She helped him settle in, adjusted his lapel. As the door closed and the plane began to taxi, Hal reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small photograph, worn at the corners, edges curled. Margaret, in her garden, laughing, dirt on her cheek, hair caught by sunlight. Her voice returned like wind through a window left open. "Family is everywhere, even where we don't expect to find them." He looked around the cabin. A businessman reading headlines, a mother soothing a baby, a young man across the aisle giving him a respectful nod. And then he looked inward, to the crowd that had stood for him, the people who had spoken when others stayed silent. He smiled, not wide, but real. As the plane rose into the clouds, Hal rested his hand on the metal case tucked under his arm and let his eyes close for just a moment. Not in retreat, but in peace. The video spread faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, it had been shared across veterans forums, military family pages, national networks. No edits, no dramatic music, just raw footage. A 90-year-old man retrieving scattered medals off a cold airport floor, and a supervisor saluting him before a silent crowd. The caption was simple: "We forgot him, but he never forgot us." The comments poured in by the thousands. "My father served in Korea. He passed last year. Watching this broke me. This man is why I signed up. This is what respect looks like." The hashtag #JugHonorHal began trending, not out of pity, but reverence. News anchors spoke his name with pause. A morning show replayed the clip and then invited a Korean War historian to remind viewers what a Silver Star meant. And then came the press release. Denver International Airport and its security partner officially launched the Briggs Veterans Honor Program, a sponsorship and recognition initiative designed to honor aging servicemen and women who traveled without fanfare, many of whom carried medals not in display cases, but in shirt pockets and duffel bags. They issued a public apology. They also returned the knife, not in a padded envelope, not by courier, but in person. A senior airport executive flew to San Diego, waited respectfully at Hal's granddaughter Emma's graduation, and handed him the item wrapped in navy velvet. "We're placing a replica of this," the man said, "in a permanent display at the airport, but the real one belongs with you." Hal held it gently, the initials still scratched into the handle. Jake's memory returned. A few days later, Emma asked him what the knife had meant. Hal told her the story, not in full, but enough. She cried. Then she hugged him for a long time, whispering, "I'm proud to be part of your story." Hal didn't say anything in return, because some things don't need words. If stories like this resonate with your heart, like and subscribe for more untold moments of honor, sacrifice, and quiet courage. Let us know where you're watching from, and comment below to honor a veteran or silent hero in your life. Your words might be exactly what someone needs to feel seen today. The best way to preserve their memory is to keep listening. Click on the suggested video now, and we'll walk together through another forgotten chapter of valor, one story at a time.